Hello and welcome to today's episode of Ag Policy, the podcast. My name is Hansjürg Jäger and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion in this episode together with Josh Baethge from Farm Progress. We are talking about the improvement of agricultural policy. Josh, how are you doing?
Doing great. Always good to chat with you. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. I'm looking forward to, I believe, one of the most debated questions, how to improve ag policy. But before we do so, what was the reason why we chose this topic?
I think, just in our conversations offline, it kind of gets to the heart of what we both cover. You and I both spend a lot of time covering the debates over ag policy, talking to people, farmers, other people in the industry, how it impacts them. And I think we can both agree, there's a broad consensus that there's a need for a better agriculture policy. But after all the debate, that debate continues over what exactly that policy would look like. So I think with your expertise and what I've learned, we thought it would be an interesting endeavor to talk about what exactly does better ag policy mean. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say and what your perspective is and how different that is from what I'm hearing here in the States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the interesting thing is like better policy is always the answer to this question is always a bit dependent on the context. And what we are now going to discuss is what does better policy mean in the US? What does it mean in Switzerland? And then we would also add a brief perspective of science. So to give you a complete overview about the question of what does a better policy looks like. Going to the US, what would a better policy mean?
Well, I think, it fundamentally gets to, the question of what are we trying to address here? And I think, it always comes back to how do we help farmers? How do we have an abundant food supply? How do we have a safe
Mm-hmm.
food supply? And then, how do we keep costs down for the consumer and ensure farmers get paid? And then that's kind of been the debate of this the whole time. And I think, initially, I know we'll dive into some other specifics here. Farmers want stability in the U.S. Right now, we have a lot of policy changes. There's open debate over what is going to help them. But right now with the Trump administration, we have farm legislation installed. We have 5-year farm bill in the United States that's
Mm-hmm.
been stalled. There've been that's what that predates Trump. We have that. We have tariffs and trade deals are up in the air right now. We have immigration policies that are impacting farm labor, which is already a high cost for farmers. And more than anything, I think farmers first just want to have stability and understand what the rules are, what they have to work with, so they can plan. And right now, there's just a lot of uncertainty, and I think that kind of gets to the heart. And I would imagine you're seeing a lot of the same, in some of the debates you're hearing in Switzerland and nearby in the EU. Is that correct?
Yes, it's similar. Farmers ask for stability in the medium and long term because what we see is like, well, the investment cycles in agriculture, they are rather long. We talk about 20, 25 years if you build a new stable for your animals. And then, well, if the policy changes too quickly, you might have problems with your investments, which is a particularity of the Swiss system on how to support agriculture. The general agreement is, however, that a good policy is somewhat easy to apply, somewhat efficient as well in the public spending, like public money well spent. And there is this agreement as well that there has to be a certain support for agriculture. And this is consensus among all the different political parties. So we do rather seldomly talk about the ag policy yes or no question, and much more about, well, how do we spend the money on agriculture? And I don't know, I mean, the US, is it there similar as well?
It's
Or
similar. I'd say there's a little more emphasis on market driven a market-driven agriculture, which is somewhat similar, but it is kind of ironic because also agriculture depends on government support. So there's kind of this
Mhm.
dichotomy of trying to help farmers become active entrepreneurs in the market, but at the same time, this is recognition that as conditions are right now, that can't happen without government support. So I think you see this constant debate over what is the role of government, what is the role of the market, how do you protect agriculture, grow it, and keep people in farming. And I know one of the things we talked about before. I think that's a difference between Switzerland and the U.S. is the size of farms, small family farms.
Sure.
Now,
Mhm.
I believe it, and remind me about that again. I mean, most Swiss farms are smaller scale, and that makes up the majority of the farm income. Am I right on that, or am I saying that wrong?
Well, it's there are several things about the farm size in Switzerland. For one, the average size is about 25 hectares, 22 to 25 hectares per
Mhm.
farm. So I believe in the US scale of things, that's considered a tiny farm.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I'm trying to do hectares in my head, but yeah, you're correct on that.
and in the same time, what we see, the farms are getting bigger. If you look at the dairy sector, there are farms with more than 100 cows, and the bigger farms with, let's say, 50 and more cows, the number of those grows, while the number of very small farms decreases. So we have this structural change towards bigger farms using economies of scale, um, and compensating the loss of farmers. We lose every year about 1% of our farming, of our numbers of farmers. And those surfaces and production capacities, they then go to the other farmers who can take over. And then it depends a bit on the region, on whether the farmers are able to compensate the loss of their colleagues. In certain regions, farms have become, well, in the mountainous areas mainly, uh, up after 50 hectares, it's becoming increasingly difficult to farm by just a family. And in
Hmm.
the mountainous areas, you can't compensate too much. So there we see that the structure is already, well, at its optimum or maximum. And then the question comes, okay, what does it have to do with ag policy? And we see that the ag policy there has different roles compared to the support of more intensive farmers in the Midlands, um, who do have more production capacity just because of the climate, and because of the closeness to the distribution centers. And this is then very difficult to balance. Like you have a very small country, a very diverse agriculture, and what is happening then is, like, in the positioning of, let's say, the Swiss Farmers Union, they go back to principal points, what a good policy would mean for all the farmers in Switzerland, or for almost all the farmers in Switzerland. And there are, well, very few talking points. First, it's a general support. It has to be maintained in a certain level. In absolute terms, although the number of farms decreases, so you could argue, well, and this is the Federal Council are doing from time to time, you could argue the support per farm increases, which isn't what we want, so we could decrease the general spending. Swiss Farmers Union opposes this successfully so far. So
Right.
this is one point. The second point is, well, border protection for our markets, like tariffs and quotas. For the farmers, it's clear it has to be maintained. Now, having the discussion with the US and the tariffs, I mean, this is a whole other topic we should discuss later on. It is severely affecting our industry, especially the dairy industry, because we can't export our cheeses anymore to the US to a reasonable price. So there is some pressure to be expected on those markets. So that's the second thing. Like the border protection has to be maintained, and the third thing is then stability. Like, we want an agricultural policy that is more or less stable and designed in a continuous manner. This is like, so the three main talking points if we're talking about the demands on ag policy in Switzerland, and as well what a good policy would look like.
Yeah. And that's surprisingly similar to, to kind of some of the debates we're having right now. Obviously
Oh,
border
really?
security. Yeah, border security, is a big issue. Over the past, 5 to 10 years, there has been a major influx of people coming into the United States, primarily, through the southern border with Mexico. And, that's led to a lot of backlash. It's also led to, straining, resources in local communities where these, impoverished people are coming into the country.
Mhm,
So there is a desire, to maintain the border, to kind of stop the flow of immigrants, to where it's something more the country can handle. At the same time, 40 something percent, some estimates put it at 60% of agriculture workers in the U.S. farm laborers are
mhm,
immigrants
mhm,
from these countries. So, and the farmers already
mhm,
facing, high labor costs, that only adds to that, that pressure on them. So it's like you said, trying to find the balance between the desire to protect the border and maintain integrity there, but at the same time, provide these farmers with workers that otherwise they can't have, because they're just, that labor pool just isn't available in domestically right now.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um,
I have to correct. I believe border protection, I meant especially the protection of the markets, like
oh,
tariffs and quotas.
Oh yeah, well we're obviously,
So,
facing that too, right? Yeah. so,
and
I went off on a tangent there. Yeah, but
but I mean, the question of immigration workers. This is a particularity of the U.S. agriculture, isn't it?
it is, and it speaks to a lot of issues, the ability, people to do the work, the
Mhm,
amount farmers are willing to pay. But it's just been one of those things that's been accepted in agriculture for a long time. It's an open secret,
mhm,
that
mhm,
legal and illegal immigrants
mhm,
provide,
mhm,
significant labor pool.
mhm,
But now that it's
mhm,
kind of
mhm,
become a hot button political issue, that that's gotten a lot more attention through the administration. You're seeing raids on farms, raids on factories, trying to
mhm,
deport people that have been working in this country for years,
mhm, mhm,
honestly not bothering anybody, but they're technically not illegal. Yeah, and then going back to your point on tariffs, right now that's a huge concern. The U.S. has some legitimate concerns in other industries. China flooding the market with, inferior products, all sorts of, trade practices we can go into. But from a farmer standpoint, that China is one of our top three, export partners. China is our biggest, exporter of soybeans, and this year so far, as of the beginning of September, they had not bought any soybeans from the U.S., which is very concerning, and that's a direct result of these, protectionist trade policies.
So
So
China is not buying any more U.S. soy or vice versa.
they have not so far this year. So now that's it. Typically, the U.S. China gets most of its, soybeans from Brazil during,
Mhm,
the spring and the summer, and then, as
mhm.
the seasons change and U.S. harvest season comes up, the U.S. supply, U.S. becomes a bigger supplier toward the end of the year. But even saying that, still through this year, I think, it was the U.S. still exported a significant amount of soybeans even during the off season, and so far as the beginning of September,
Oh wow.
they had not bought any. Now, there's a debate: is
Oh.
this, Brazil's upping their, soybean supply?
Mhm,
They can sell
mhm,
cheaper because of the retaliatory tariffs. So that's a
mhm,
huge issue. Finding that
mhm.
balance between, fair trade and, our biggest
Has
trading
the,
partners.
has then the notion of a good ag policy, like if you look on it from, let's say, in a 5 years perspective or 10 years perspective, has that a notion of what a good ag policy would mean or would be? Has this changed?
It's changing right now, and I think what you've seen is typically in American politics, you have the Republican Party has always been the party pushing for free trade, and the
Mhm.
Democratic Party is while pushing for free trade, is a little more cautious. Wants more worker protections, other things to ensure it's, people are treated correctly. But generally speaking, free trade has been a general consensus among both parties for the past, 20-30 years, if not more. And now, with, the President Trump, has kind of changed that on the Republican side, going back to more protectionist trade policies, and that's a big change, from recent U.S. history. You're talking going back, 80, 100 years to where we had a president that was this protectionist on trade, and so I think, there's kind of, especially among farmers, which overwhelmingly supported the president, there's a willingness to wait and see how this works out, because the president says he's going to take care of U.S. farmers. But as far as specifics, where do the numbers add up? That's the big question. Are there, soybeans, for example, can trade deals with other countries and increase production of biofuels and increase domestic consumption? Can that offset the loss of, this massive
Mhm.
percentage of our exports?
Mhm.
Most people would say objectively no, but that's part of the strategy the administration is pushing at this point. There's also a push to uh, there's an investigation in the Brazil trading practices right now, with the U.S. accusing Brazil of unfair
Mhm.
practices, making the soybeans less expensive. So we'll see how all those things work out. But it's a lot. It's a lot to work through, and there's a lot of skepticism. I think this is the easiest way to say it. That's all going to end up benefiting farmers.
And what about the general willingness to support agriculture? I mean, I heard that the SNAP programs are a huge debate. Now, you told me the other day that like the farm bill is blocked because of disagreement on where to spend the money on. But how is it then? Is because of this new situation, is there the willingness to support agriculture in general or income support
you know,
increasing?
there was in July. There was a budget bill passed. It was known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Hmm.
It was a legislation President Trump wanted to push through.
Hmm.
And typically some of these things, regarding funding for SNAP, which is, nutrition program, and commodity support, crop insurance, Republicans with the majority were able to put a lot of those things into that big, beautiful bill on their terms. So what they did in essence, was said, we're going to give more money to farmers by cutting nutrition spending and increasing spending on commodity programs, increasing subsidies for crop
Yeah,
insurance.
yeah, yeah.
Most of that starts, kicking in next year. And again, from a farmer's perspective, they see this as more money going towards them. It will help them. Now, will it offset,
Directly.
some of that
Hmm.
market they had on
Hmm.
nutrition spending and
Hmm. Hmm.
other changes? That's the part that remains to be seen, because, obviously other issues impact farmers, outside of agricultural legislation. So there's one thought that this is very beneficial for farmers, and it should be. But when you talk about, overall cuts to health insurance, cuts to other, social programs, will they end up as families paying more despite
Hmm.
getting more money from the government? That's kind of an open question right now. We won't know the answer to that until we see the impact of these things in 2026, 2027, 2028. But that's a big question out there long
Hmm.
term.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the distribution of money and the redistribution of money. If we're talking about an ag policy development in Switzerland, what is kind of the holy grail of the whole thing is like, don't change the way the money is spent, because as soon as you touch the distribution, you have some conflicts within agriculture, which is well, not that easy to handle for the Swiss Farmers Union in particular.
Sure.
And well, apparently we have to go there and discuss in the end, well, what would a good policy mean? And I mean, what we see in Switzerland, and now going back to our main question, well, what is a good policy and how to improve ag policy? What we see is that our government is trying to go in four directions. It's like the food security, to maintain food security, and in our case, it's on one hand having a productive agriculture in Switzerland, and on the other hand, it's having access to foreign markets. So this for us is vital to have both in order to reach at food security. We have the sustainability, which is important as well. So the reduction of the ecological footprint. We do strive for economic and social viability and simplification of the ag policy. Simplification is difficult. I believe it's the same in the US. And what then the Swiss Farmers Union is bringing in is like they want to push for a more productive and multifunctional agriculture, fair producer prices, and long-term planning security, and of course then balanced markets and a positive public image, so to speak. So we see like the parliament and the Swiss Office for Agriculture and is providing the frame, and the Swiss Farmers Union is kind of filling it a bit with their um, ideas of a good agriculture. What do you think is in the US? Is it similar there in terms of the process that the government is giving the frame and the lobby groups or the interest groups are then painted a bit, or how does it look there on that side?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's a very similar dynamic. I think kind of as you touched on there, part of the problem is that sometimes the interests of these, different factions don't align. Like, you mentioned, for example, environmental footprint. Right now, kind of based on the political coalitions, a lot of the groups that are, supporting things like, solar and wind energy, uh, more efforts to support climate change. That was a big priority of the last administration, and working towards incentivizing farmers to do certain programs that would do practices, or increase solar energy, increase wind energy, you know contain waste on their farms, et cetera. And now what you're seeing, in the name of making things more efficient, is the Trump
Mm-hmm.
administration and the Republicans are, pulling back on a lot of these programs, which required a lot of, paperwork and, extra legwork for farmers, and just saying, we're going to make it easier for you. We're going to cut these programs. We're going to give you funding different ways. So you're getting the efficiency, but from the environmental side, you're losing a lot of the benefits that it's just simply not a priority for the Trump administration right now. And I think one of the stats that I like that I think really sums it up the best is, we had a report that came out this week, and this is through early September. Farm income in the U.S. is on track to hit 180 billion this year, which would be the second most on record. And
Uh-huh.
41 billion of that is because of government support enacted at the end of last year, basically to offset
Holy crap!
market conditions last year, and also to offset some natural disasters. That money's kicking in this year.
Oh, it's
at,
a whole
at the
lot of
same
money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. At the same time, you have farm sector debt has increased 5% last year. It's up nearly 20% since 2022. And a lot of that just goes to the disparity of wealth between the large scale operations and the small operations. In the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
U.S., 86% of the farms are make under $350,000 a year in gross farm cash income. But only the 4% of the biggest producers account for 48% of that production. So when you get back to the question of who
Oh wow.
who who are these policies benefiting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, farmers benefit from that, but these small farmers are still going more into debt. We're having a record year last year. For farm bankruptcies, farm foreclosures, so it's
Mm-hmm.
helping
Mm-hmm.
some. How do you help all? And that just kind of gets back, kind of to our original question of, how do you craft a policy? What policies, would benefit the most people and be good for the ag industry? And
And what would then an improved ag policy look like?
I mean, from that perspective, I think it would be programs that, while recognizing that these large scale operations are necessary, they're a huge part of the economy, a huge
Mm-hmm.
part of the food supply. Just maintaining. That I think there's a general uh, belief, just among the public and among agriculture, that small towns, small family farmers are the key to agriculture. But if you look at some of these trends, these costs that they're facing, that even with record farm income, they're struggling to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a
Mm-hmm.
policy where you could maintain this increase in farm income, but able to keep these small farms, not only running but profitable, and bringing the next generation into farming. Because without that, we're seeing it's harder and harder for these generational farms to continue, because you have smart kid goes to college, they see how
Mm-hmm.
difficult this industry is, and
Yeah.
unless you really love it, why would you want to go into that? And
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
imagine that that's a challenge in Switzerland too, is it? Or,
It is. It is a big challenge. The question of who is taking over the farms, and in combination as well, what would a good farming or ag sector structure look like? This is a huge, uh, and an ongoing debate as well. And what we found, we hosted an event the other week here at the Swiss School for Forest, Food, and Agricultural Science, where we covered exactly the topic of structural change. How do we get around the corner, so to say? And we figured, among other things, that it doesn't matter where you stand in your trajectory, in your career trajectory. As soon as you are part of the industry, you contribute in a certain way to this development of the structures, be it by adjusting your farm or your company you're working for to a certain market, or by trying to change the market regulation. And what we see here in Switzerland is I mean, farming is an interesting business. There are a lot of young people wanting or doing the education. We saw that in Austria there are a lot of young farmers or a lot of young people coming into the industry, seeing its importance for, let's say, the sustainability, for doing some, well, I mean, there is not much more useful and important profession than, well, putting food on the table of people. Like, you
Right.
can't be, there is not much left for doing some work having a deeper sense or deeper meaning.
Right.
So
Yeah.
therefore, this makes it attractive. And then there is the economic side, which doesn't very well add up, or it depends a bit on how capable you are to build a business around it. And the ag policy process is very bad or very poorly designed to incentivize farmers to try new things. It's much more skewed towards providing continuity
Yeah. Yeah. Just
and
continuity.
stability.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
the easier thing. I mean, an improved policy or a good policy, from my perspective, would be a framework that is adaptable and which counts on the different, let's say, situations on the ground, because every farm is a bit different, which is also taking into consideration sustainability as a core principle, and which also built on the basis of the multifunctionality of agriculture. So and then bringing this together with payments, well, that's then a quite a challenge. And with looking at our time, we're talking already. We said we want to go for 20 minutes, and now we are 27, or close to 27 minutes.
You mean we haven't solved it yet? We haven't answered this
No.
question, but but I
Did
do
you
think,
expect us to have an answer?
Oh, I thought we had all the answers here, but no, I do think though, really what you said there is kind of what it comes down to when you combine all these things together. I think most farmers are willing to are willing to change, are
Mhm.
open to sustainability or other things, but they've it's got to be made easy for them and not cost them. There's a lot of programs in the U.S. where government money is invested and it promises results down the line, but there's an initial investment, and in farmers that already don't have a lot of extra money to invest, it's a struggle. And I think if you're going to
Mhm.
do some things with money, it has to farmers are willing to do it if it's seamless and easy. And I think right now, despite the massive amount of funding for farmers, a lot of these programs are still hard to access, are still hard
Yep.
to
Yep.
they take a while to kick in. So if you want
Mhm.
to bring
Mhm.
all this together and address safety and the sustainability, environmental issues and farming, that money has to go easily to farmers, and it has to be done in a way um, that they see immediate benefits and are willing to go with these policies.
Yep.
But
Yep.
with government never moves that fast, and then we're back to our challenges right now.
Yeah, indeed. But it sums it up quite well, because at the end it's about, well, we all want to live in a healthy environment. We all want to do good, and we might have the right to a policy framework that supports doing good. And I think what you said before is like having or providing the access to the funds in a way that helps to improve the situation seems to be crucial for the future. And what we've seen so far is that good policy depends a bit on the perspective, or on who's looking at it. We didn't touch too much on the different perspective along the value chain. Like, the food industry has its interests. There are interests from the service providing companies to agriculture. And of course, consumers do have their ideas of an ideal ag policy as well. We didn't talk about that, but we saw that there are shared goals. I mean, sustainability, if it is a business, there is a certain need for fairness and effectiveness of the public spending. Is there anything else to add?
I think just really quickly, I think that's one other key when you mention all of those different, people impacted, these different stakeholders, if you will, businesses, environmental interest, farmers themselves. That, too often in the crafting of ag policy, these interests are against each other. You have, food companies versus environmentalists. You have, farmers versus government, and there needs to be a recognition that all of them play a vital role in if they don't, if there isn't a compromise reached, it's just going to go back and forth and back and forth. Somebody gets their interest at the expense of somebody else, and just the recognition that everybody has to work together, because if you take any of those components out, the whole system falls apart. But sometimes, in politics today, that's easier said than done.
Yeah, indeed, and that's a very good point to closing this episode. Thank you very much, Josh. It has been a pleasure again to talking to you.
Hey, always great chatting with you here. I could keep going for hours, but everybody would stop listening to us at that point.
Well, apparently,
or maybe they won't.
we see. If to our listeners, if you made it that far, please let us know. We are happy for any feedback and hint on what you'd like us to cover more. And anyways, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who care about the future of agriculture, a better ag policy, or who need to know some things they don't know yet. And if you have any questions or ideas for the future, just drop them. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.